The morning began with the kind of stillness that usually promised nothing more dramatic than a quiet weekend. The sun rose slowly above the rooftops, casting long streaks of gold through the half-closed blinds of Ethan Turner's room. He stirred beneath his blanket, phone buzzing insistently on the nightstand. With a groan, he rolled over and grabbed it, blinking at the brightness of the screen. "Josh, bro, wake up. We're heading out in 30. Don't make us come drag you." Ethan smirked, tossing the phone aside. Josh never let a Saturday go to waste, and today was no exception. They'd been planning this little road trip for weeks, just him, Josh, Kyle, and Brandon, a battered old Honda Civic, and a playlist loud enough to drown out the world. He stretched, yawning, his body still heavy from sleep, but his mind already buzzing with anticipation. Weekends like this were his escape from college deadlines, from the suffocating quiet of home, and most of all, from his mother. Downstairs, Margaret Turner was already awake. She had been awake since before dawn, sipping her first cup of coffee in silence. The lines around her eyes deepened as she stared out the kitchen window, watching sparrows hop along the garden fence. Her hands trembled slightly when she set the cup down. Sleep had been thin lately, broken by worrying she never spoke aloud. The heavy thud of Ethan's footsteps on the stairs jolted her back. She straightened as he entered, tall and broad-shouldered, his dark hair in disarray. He didn't look at her, his eyes were on the counter, on the toast he grabbed and bit into without a word. "Morning," Margaret said gently. Ethan gave the smallest nod, chewing, his phone already in hand. "Where are you going today?" she asked, trying to keep her tone light. He swallowed, still not looking at her. "Out with Josh. Don't wait for me." Margaret's jaw tightened. "Ethan, at least tell me, Mum." He cut her off, sharp, impatient. "Relax. It's just a drive. We're not kids anymore." The words hit her like a slap. She wanted to remind him that he would always be her child, no matter how old he was. But she bit the words back. He wouldn't listen, not now. "Be careful," she said instead, softly. He smirked, rolling his eyes as though the very idea of caution was beneath him. "Always am." The front door slammed moments later, leaving Margaret alone with her untouched toast. She pressed her palms together and whispered a prayer, her voice almost lost in the hum of the refrigerator. "Please, God, keep him safe." Josh's car was waiting at the curb, music shaking the thin frame of the vehicle. Ethan climbed in, greeted by the smell of energy drinks and fast food wrappers. Finally, Josh grinned from behind the wheel, his blonde hair falling into his eyes. "Man, you take forever. At least I look good doing it," Ethan shot back, fastening his seatbelt. From the back seat, Kyle whooped, raising a soda can in mock salute. Brandon, already filming on his phone, leaned forward. "This is it, boys. Road trip of legends." The Honda roared onto the street, tires humming against the asphalt. The windows were down, the wind rushing in, and the music blared so loud they had to shout over it. Laughter filled the cramped space, reckless and bright. For Ethan, it was freedom. Every mile between him and his mother's worried eyes felt like fresh air. He leaned his head back, letting the wind whip his hair, and closed his eyes. Here, he wasn't the stubborn son or the boy who constantly disappointed. Here, he was just Ethan, one of the guys, untouchable. The highway stretched endlessly before them, a ribbon of gray cutting through fields that swayed in the summer breeze. The sun climbed higher, its glare bouncing off the hood. Josh drummed on the steering wheel in rhythm with the music, his grin wide. "This is the life," he shouted. Kyle shouted back, mangling the lyrics of the song. Brandon kept recording, capturing every off-key chorus, every reckless laugh. Ethan opened his eyes, watching the sky. He thought of nothing, not of college, not of Margaret, not of the aching distance between them. For once, he felt light. But fate has a cruel way of intruding. It began with a flicker, a car ahead of them swerving slightly into their lane. Josh cursed under his breath, jerking the wheel. Laughter faltered, replaced by sudden silence. "Whoa, man," Ethan muttered. "Eyes on the road." "I got it," Josh said, casually, pressing harder on the accelerator. The turn came faster than expected, a sharp bend cutting through the highway. Josh's grin faltered as he tugged at the wheel. The tires screamed in protest. The car fishtailed, and in that single breathless second, everything unraveled. A horn blared. Headlights filled the windshield. Then impact. The world shattered into sound and pain. Metal crumpled, glass exploded, bodies slammed against seatbelts. Ethan's chest seized as the strap bit into his ribs. The air knocked out of him in a violent rush. His head cracked against the side window, stars burst across his vision. Someone screamed. He wasn't sure if it was him. The car spun, skidding to a halt with a sickening crunch against the guardrail. Silence followed, heavy, ringing, broken only by the hiss of steam rising from the twisted hood. Ethan gasped, his lungs burning. Pain roared through his body, hot and sharp. His legs felt trapped, crushed beneath something heavy. He tried to move, but agony pinned him in place. "Ethan," Josh's voice cracked, panicked. He was leaning across the seat, blood running down his forehead. "Stay with me, man. Stay awake." Ethan opened his mouth, but only a weak groan escaped. Darkness crowded the edges of his vision, thick and irresistible. In the distance, sirens wailed, sharp, urgent, coming closer. His last sight before the blackness swallowed him was the mangled wreck of the car, steam curling into the sky, on Josh's trembling hands shaking his shoulder. Then nothing. The world returned in fragments. Voices muffled. The smell of smoke and gasoline. The sharp sting of air on his face. Hands touched him, lifted him. A voice shouted orders, calm, practiced, urgent. Male, early 20s, unresponsive. Pulse weak. Possible internal bleeding. The gurney rattled as they rushed him toward the ambulance. Lights flashed red and blue against the shattered glass, painting the chaos in harsh color. Margaret was not there to see it. She was still at home, rinsing her empty cup, unaware that her whispered prayer was already being tested. Inside the ambulance, Ethan's consciousness flickered like a dying flame. Pain throbbed in his abdomen, radiating through every nerve. The paramedic's face hovered above him, mask tight, eyes focused. "Stay with us, kid," the man urged. "Don't you quit on me." But Ethan couldn't answer. The darkness was pulling too hard, dragging him under. His last thought before slipping away was not of his friends, not of Josh's frantic shouts. It was of his mother's face, stern and worried, the way she had looked at him in the kitchen that morning. And for the first time in years, he wondered if maybe she had been right to worry. That night, Margaret's phone rang. She was folding laundry, her hands busy, but her mind far away. She almost didn't answer. The number was unfamiliar, but something in her chest told her to pick up. "Mrs. Turner." The voice on the other end was steady, but urgent. "This is Street, Mary's hospital. There's been an accident. Your son." The laundry slipped from her hands, falling in a crumpled heap on the floor. Her world tilted, and in an instant, the quiet of her kitchen was gone, replaced by the roar of panic in her ears, the fluorescent lights of St. Mary's burned with an indifferent steadiness, humming faintly as if the building itself were forcing its heart to keep beating. When the ambulance doors flew open, the emergency bay swallowed Ethan into its bright mouth. Stretchers shouted orders, a chorus of wheels rattling across linoleum. "Male, 20, the paramedic called, pacing the gurney as it rolled. MVC, high impact, likely internal injuries. GCS fluctuating, hypotensive, tachycardic, abdomen rigid. Suspect intra-abdominal bleed. Urine output 0 en route. Get trauma in here," a nurse snapped, already slipping a blood pressure cuff around Ethan's arm. Start to large bore Ives no. Make it central line. Hayes tanking. Ethan floated somewhere beneath the words. Pain pressed on him like deep water. The kind that filled your ears until sound was just pressure and a faraway throb. He tried to lift his hand to find the shore, but even his own fingers felt foreign and slow, as if they belonged to another boy who had drifted too far from land. A man leaned into his field of view, strong jaw, calm eyes, mask in place. Ethan, my name is Dr. Carter. You're at Street Mary's. You've been in an accident. We're going to take care of you, all right? The words were a rope tossed toward him. Ethan tried to grip it with a nod. Maybe he nodded, maybe he only dreamed that he did. Monitors sang their electric lullaby. The beep of the heart, the hiss of oxygen, the click of machines acknowledging new orders they would never question. BP is 78/40, someone reported. Hello Neb, now Dr. Carter said. Type and cross 44. Page trauma surgery and nephro while you're at it. His abdomen's bored hard. A warm rush slid into Ethan's veins, blood and something cool that burned a trail up his arm. The room blurred, sharpened, blurred again. Stay with me, Doctor, Carter murmured. Squeeze my fingers. He took Ethan's hand and pressed. Ethan wanted to be strong enough to answer. He managed a twitch. Good, Carter said, as if a crack of daylight had split the storm. Let's get him to CT. The world lurched. Ceiling panels marched above like white flags, surrendering one by one. By the time Margaret reached the hospital, the automatic doors whooshed open to a gust of cold, sterilized air that smelled like bleach and endings. She stumbled to the desk, hair escaping its clip, the color gone from her face. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. My son, she said. Ethan Turner. They called me. There was an accident. The woman at the desk lifted her eyes, softened them. Yes, Mum. Ethan Turner was brought in about 15 minutes ago. Hayes with the trauma team. If you'll have a seat, someone will come speak with you shortly. I can't sit, Margaret whispered. I can't. She was already walking before she realized her legs had moved, pacing an aimless circle on the scuffed tiles, praying under her breath. Her chest ached with a heartbeat she could not quiet. A young man with a split lip and a torn t-shirt burst through the doors, stumbling like he'd outrun a pack of wolves. Josh. Blood had dried down his temple in a rusty line. Mrs. Turner, he cried, voice cracking. I'm so sorry. They took Ethan in and Kyle and Brandon are okay. I mean, not okay, but please don't hate me. Margaret reached for him, as if for a plank in high water. Are you hurt? I'm fine, he lied reflexively. His eyes were huge and wild. It was my fault. I shouldn't have, she gripped his shoulders, feeling the tremor in his bones. How is he? I don't know, he said miserably. He wasn't talking. They kept saying numbers. I don't understand numbers. A door opened, a nurse in navy scrubs appeared, her badge flashing. Mrs. Turner. I'm Julia, I'm with trauma. The team is with your son, Doctor. Carter will come speak with you as soon as he can. Please, Margaret said. Her voice failed. Please. The nurse's hand was warm on her forearm. Hayes in good hands. But good hands didn't stop the spinning. The minutes became a string pulled so tight it sang. Josh sat beside Margaret, hunched, elbows on knees, face pressed into bandaged hands. People moved past them like currents, white coats, navy scrubs, a security guard with the contained stillness of a door. At last the door opened again. A tall figure in a lead apron and a blue cap stepped through, tugging off his gloves. He stripped the mask down and revealed steady features, a calm mouth. His eyes found Margaret as if they'd been searching for her all along. Mrs. Turner. I'm Dr. Carter. She stood so fast her chair scraped. Is my son, Hayes alive, Doctor? Carter said, and the room tilted with relief so sharp it made her dizzy. We took him for CT. He has internal bleeding from a torn vessel near the kidney and significant bruising to his abdomen. We've stabilized him for now, and we're taking him to surgery to control the bleeding. Surgery, Margaret repeated, a word that seemed too small to hold all the fear it contained. We're going to do everything we can. He paused. I also need to tell you his kidneys aren't producing urine. That can happen with trauma. It may be temporary, but his labs are concerning. We're consulting nephrology. For now, our priority is to stop the bleeding. Take mine, she said without thinking, the words leaping from somewhere deep, absurd and absolute. If his kidneys don't, take one of mine, doctor. Carter's face softened. I understand. Right now, the best thing you can do is let us operate. We'll talk more soon. He held her gaze for 1 second longer than necessary, as if anchoring her to a promise, and then he was gone, disappearing into the blue current beyond the swinging door. The next hour folded in on itself. Margaret stared at the clock until the hands dissolved into meaningless shapes. She tried to pray, but found only the raw scrape of her own breathing. She thought of the toast he hadn't finished, the eye roll, the door slam. She thought of when he was 5 and fell from the swing, how he had cried and then laughed through tears when she kissed his scraped knee. She thought of every argument, every stubborn silence, every time she had said the wrong thing. Please, she told the blank ceiling. Take me apart if you must. Just give him back. Ethan dreamed, if it could be called a dream, of blue light and cold water, of voices ringing underwater as he sank toward a grey riverbed, pebbles gleaming like coins. Sometimes he hovered near the surface, where a man's voice told him to breathe, to follow the sound. Sometimes he sank, and the sound became a throb buried in stone. When he floated high enough to see faces, he saw a halo of lights and the silhouette of someone leaning over him. He felt his body jerk as hands moved inside him, which could not be true and yet was. He tried to run from his own skin and found there was nowhere to go. Then black again, the kind of black that swallows names. The door opened. Doctor. Carter returned with the slow exhale of someone who had been holding breath for hours. Margaret rose, bracing herself with the edge of the chair. Josh stood, too, swaying a little. Hayes out of surgery. Doctor. Carter said. We controlled the bleeding. He lost a lot of blood, but he tolerated the procedure. Hayes in the IQ now. Margaret's knees threatened to fold. Can I see him? In a few minutes, Carter said. The pause came again, more deliberate this time. There's something else. His kidneys still aren't working. We gave fluids, but Hayes not making urine. His lab's creatinine, potassium are high. That can be part of what we call acute kidney injury after major trauma. It may improve with time, but in the immediate period, we need to support him. How? Margaret asked, voice barely air. Well, start dialysis, he said gently. A continuous form at first, while Hayes unstable. It will take over the work of the kidneys, clear toxins, remove excess fluid until we see whether they recover. Dialysis. The word landed like a gavel. Margaret swallowed. Will he wake up? Yes, Carter said. Hayes sedated now and on a ventilator to help him breathe while his body recovers. We'll reduce sedation tomorrow if he remains stable. He glanced at Josh, taking in the boy's torn lip, the shame written in permanent marker across his posture. And you get someone to look at that cut. You did well calling EMS quickly. That mattered. Josh nodded, eyes burning. Carter turned back to Margaret. Come. He'll take you in. The IQ was all white and glass and softly measured sound. Each room was a terrarium of machines, pumps, monitors, tubes like vines carefully trained along poles. Ethan lay pale in the center, his dark hair damp against the pillow. Tape held the tube in his mouth. An IV line arced from his arm to a pump that pulsed with a steady blink. The monitor painted his heartbeat in green hills. Beside the bed, A machine purred a rectangular tower with a clear filter that blushed pink with the passage of blood. The CRT circuit. Margaret stopped just inside the doorway. Her hand flew to her mouth. For a moment nothing existed but the curve of his cheek and the slackness of his sleeping face. "He looks worse than he is, Doctor," Carter said softly. "The swelling will take time to settle. The tube helps him rest and heal. The dialysis will be gentle and continuous. The numbers will guide us." The numbers. She looked at them as if they might translate into a language she could understand. Heart rate 94, oxygen 98%, blood pressure climbing. Creatinine, potassium. These did not show themselves on a screen, but their gravity hummed in the room. "Doctor." Carter stepped aside, giving her space. "You can touch him." She moved like a pilgrim, slowing as she reached the bed. Her fingers hovered above his forehead, then settled, feather light, on his skin. He was warm. He was here. She had thought she might collapse. Instead, she felt a clarity like glass, every detail etched. The bandage peeking beneath his gown, the faint scuff on his knuckle from where, as a child, had insisted on climbing everything in the park. "Hi, baby," she whispered, and immediately choked on the word. He hadn't let her call him that in years. She said it again, steadying. "Hi, baby. I'm here." He did not move. Machines answered for him. A nurse entered, carrying a chart. "Mrs. Turner. I'm Leela. I'll be his nurse tonight." Her smile reached her eyes. "You can stay as long as you like." Margaret nodded, unable to trust her voice. She pulled the chair to the bedside, close enough to see the soft shiver of Ethan's lash when the ventilator pushed a breath. She took his hand, avoiding the lines, and wrapped both of hers around it. "Doctor." Carter waited until she looked up. "Do you have any questions for me right now? Will he need this forever?" She glanced at the dialysis machine, the word forever opening to many doors. "It's too soon to know," Carter said, honest in a way that did not feel cruel. "In many trauma cases, kidneys recover over days to weeks once the initial storm passes. Sometimes they don't fully recover. We'll reevaluate daily. And if they don't, the cliff's edge again." He did not look away. "Then we talk about long-term dialysis or transplant. But today is today. He made it through surgery. His heart is strong. He's young. He has a lot going for him. A small smile, real. And he has you." Margaret swallowed the ache. "Thank you." He touched the rail with his fingertips, as if blessing the bed. "He'll be back in the morning. If anything changes, Leela will call me." When he left, the room felt both larger and smaller. Margaret leaned back and exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. Josh hovered at the doorway, guilt a shadow stitched to his feet. "Come in," she told him. He stepped to the other side of the bed, eyes fixed on Ethan's face. "He looks not like himself," he whispered, as if speaking too loud would break the spell. "He's still himself," Margaret said. "Just fighting." Josh nodded. "I'm sorry." The words were stones had been carrying since asphalt and metal had rearranged the shape of his life. I was stupid. I kept the music up. I thought I had the turn. Josh." She didn't raise her voice, but he fell silent at once. "You're a child, too." And then, more gently, "This isn't a courtroom." He covered his face with his hands. "He'll do anything he needs. He'll come every day." He glanced up, hope and fear braided in his eyes. "May I pray?" Margaret nodded, unexpected warmth rising through ICS. They bowed their heads on opposite sides of the bed. Josh's prayer was clumsy, the kind of prayer built from broken parts and urgency. Margaret's prayer was quieter, a hum under her breath. Between them, the machines kept time. Night in the IQ was a different animal, quieter, but never still. Leela moved in and out with the measured grace of someone who had learned to make peace with beeps. She explained each step as if the clarity might ease a mother's pain, checking labs, adjusting fluids, titrating the medicine that kept Ethan comfortable, but close enough to the surface that he could return when called. "His potassium is coming down," she said at one point, and Margaret held on to the words as if they were rope. Ours thinned to threads. Margaret dozed in the chair, head tilted at an angle that would punish her neck tomorrow. In half sleep, she dreamed of Ethan at 5 again, sticky with popsicle, asking if the moon followed their car because it liked them. She dreamed of his teenage scowl, the slamming door that had become a punctuation mark in their home. She dreamed of herself, younger and more afraid than she knew, working late and coming home to a boy who had learned to meet fire with fire. She woke to Leela's hand on her shoulder. "You should drink some water," the nurse said. "Eat something if you can." Margaret nodded, but her hand would not leave Ethan's. Later, the dialysis machine hummed, steady as surf on a beach she might never visit again. Ethan's chest rose and fell, rose and fell. The ventilator sighed along with him. Somewhere before dawn, the door opened and a woman in a white coat entered, dark hair knotted at the nape of her neck. "I'm Dr. Singh," she said softly. "Nephrology. I'm following Ethan with Dr. Carter." Margaret stood, instinct tightening her spine. "Is it worse?" "It's stable," Dr. Singh said, "which is a kind of good. The dialysis is doing what we need it to do. We'll continue today and see what his kidneys decide." She approached the machine like a familiar friend and checked the filters, the lines, the soft pulse of the pump. Trauma can cause acute tubular injury. Think of it like the kidneys' pipes being stunned. They often wake up, but sometimes they need encouragement. "What kind of encouragement do kidneys understand?" Margaret asked, a tremulous smile twitching despite herself. "Time," Dr. Singh said, "and patience. 2 things hospitals are famously bad at, but we try." Her eyes warmed. "May I ask, you mentioned to Dr. Carter that you'd give him your kidney?" Margaret flushed, embarrassed by the nakedness of the impulse. "I would," she said, unable to unsay it even if she wanted to. "I will, Dr. Singh inclined her head, not dismissing, not promising. "Let's take one day at a time. For now, your job is this." She nodded at Ethan's hand, held in Margaret's. "You'd be surprised how much of medicine is proximity." After she left, Margaret sat again, her body sore from fear. She turned Ethan's hand in hers, tracing the faint white line of an old scar near his thumb. He'd gotten it on the chain-link fence at school, chasing a soccer ball. He'd been brave then, too, not crying until they were in the car and she'd said, "Let it out." He had. So had she later, alone in the kitchen with the lights off and the sink on, because sometimes noise helped mask the sound of breaking. Now, in this bright, humming room, she pressed her mouth to his knuckles. "I'm here," she whispered into his skin. "I'm not going anywhere." Ethan climbed the long stairs of sleep and paused behind a door made of glass. On the other side stood a kitchen washed in morning light and a woman with her hands wrapped around a mug. He wanted to call to her. He lifted his hand, it was heavy with water. His mouth opened, the ventilator sighed for him. He couldn't make a sound. Panic flared, then eased at the feeling of warmth on his fingers. Someone was holding his hand. The door at the top of the stairs thinned. He was tired. He rested his head against it and waited. When day finally wandered into the IQ, grey and reluctant, Dr. Carter returned with his morning quiet. He reviewed the chart with Leela, checked the lines himself, and then turned to Margaret. "He did well overnight," he said. "Blood pressure is better. We'll lighten sedation a touch, see how he responds. He won't be fully awake with the tube in, but he may move, follow simple commands." Margaret's heart stumbled. "Will he be in pain?" "We'll keep him comfortable," Carter said. "If you see him struggle, talk to him. It helps more than you think." He adjusted the IV pump with long, deliberate fingers. The numbers on the monitor shifted by imperceptible degrees. Ethan's lash trembled. His brow pulled together faintly, as if he had lost some small thing and couldn't remember where he'd left it. "Ethan," Carter said, calm as a lake. "If you can hear me, squeeze your mother's hand." Margaret forgot how to breathe. She focused all the light in the world into the spot where their hands met. "It's me, baby," she said, voice steady because she forced it to be. "Right here." For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then his fingers twitched once, then again, a weak, stubborn closing around hers. "That's it," Carter said, allowing himself a smile. "Good." Margaret bowed her head over their joined hands, and for the first time since the phone call, some part of her unclenched. Carter stepped back, letting the moment be theirs. "We'll reassess the dialysis this afternoon," he said quietly to Leela in the doorway. "If he remains hemodynamically stable, we can increase ultrafiltration slowly. Protect the kidneys from further hits." He bought himself a chance. He looked back once at the bed, the boy, the mother, the machine that hung between them like a modest miracle, and then left to tend to other fires. Margaret smoothed Ethan's hair, the way she had when fevers burned him as a child. "You're doing so well," she whispered. "You rest. He'll keep watch." She did not move for a long time. The room breathed around her. Beyond the glass, the ICUS day began its measured march, carts squeaking past, orders exchanged in murmurs, coffee cooling in forgotten cups. Within that transparent square, a mother anchored herself to the sound of machines and the weight of a hand in hers. And somewhere just under waking, a son held the faint imprint of her voice, as if it were a lighthouse seen through fog, distant, steady, impossible to mistake for anything else. Outside, September sunlight found the hospital windows and laid its pale warmth across the glass. The world carried on, but inside this room, the day had one job only: to endure. By afternoon, he was still stable. Leela adjusted the dialysis settings. Dr. Singh returned and nodded at numbers as if they were old adversaries behaving for once. Josh came back with 2 coffees he forgot to drink. He stood in the doorway like a sentry, then sat and told Ethan stories he would not remember: how Carl cried when the nurse put in an IV, like actual tears. "Man, I swear." How Brandon had sworn to throw his phone into a river after he posts this one last vid. His voice wobbled and righted itself, a skateboard rolling over cracked sidewalk. Margaret listened, gratitude and exhaustion braiding tight. At one point, she closed her eyes and saw Ethan at 16, jaw clenched, saying, "You don't get me," with the conviction of someone who mistook pain for truth. She had wanted to shout back, "I don't get you because you won't let me." Instead, she had said something sharper, and the distance had widened. That was the thing about distance. It pretended to be a wall, but really, it was a slope easy to slide, hard to climb. She opened her eyes to the sight of his chest rising. "Climb," she thought. "We will climb." Evening came, and with it a pink wash along the southern sky that the IQ could not see. Margaret's sister Claire called, her voice steady as a metronome. "I'm coming tomorrow. Do you need anything now?" "Just pray," Margaret said. "I already am," Claire replied. Every hour after they hung up, Margaret stayed where she was, hand in hand, light thinning around them. When the nurse came to change her dressing, Margaret stepped back, but never far. "You're doing beautifully," Leela told her. "He knows you're here." Margaret glanced at the dialysis machine, the looping tubing, the gentle sifting. A part of her wanted to bargain with it directly, to make it an offer: "Take what you need from me." But she kept still. "One day at a time, Dr. Singh had said. 1 hour, 1 breath." She leaned close to her son's ear and gave him the map she herself needed. "He'll be here when you wake," she murmured. "He'll be here when you sleep. He'll be here when they take that tube out. He'll be here if your kidneys are stubborn. He'll be here if they're kind. He'll be here, Ethan. Do you hear me?" On the monitor, A green peak rose and fell, rose and fell. His fingers tightened a fraction, a whisper of pressure against her palm. "I hear you," that touch said. Or maybe she only hoped it did. "Either way," she answered as if he had spoken aloud. "I know," she said. "I know." Outside the door, the hospital's evening shift arrived, trading places with the day. Inside, mother and son held their small, unbroken vigil, and the machine between them hummed a promise no one dared say out loud. This is not the end. The IQ chair did not forgive the spine, but Margaret stayed in it anyway. Her body curved around Ethan's hand like a breakwater around a harbor. The room hummed its soft machinery lullaby outside the glass. Nurses passed with the brisk surety of people who knew how to live inside emergencies. When the beep settled into their hypnotic logic, memory began its slow, stubborn tide, pulling her backward past the sirens and the sterile lights, past the slammed doors and arguments, to the years when Ethan had been a boy who fit in the crook of her arm. She saw him at 3, cheeks flushed from a winter wind, toddling through a drift of powdered sugar snow toward the apartment door. His gloved hand batted at the air as a stray flake landed on his eyelashes. "Cold tickles," he had said solemnly, eyelashes trembling. She had laughed then, the kind of laugh that started in the stomach and climbed to the throat. She had pulled him in, stamping their boots on the mat, and he had tipped his face up for a kiss with the unquestioning trust of small creatures. In that old kitchen with the chipping linoleum, she had melted cocoa on the stove and watched the steam fog the window, her happiness simple enough to fit in the space between kettle and mug. Those days had not lasted. Nothing uncomplicated ever did. The first hairline crack, his father leaving. It had not happened with slamming suitcases or public scenes. Matthew Turner, with his easy smile and talent for postponing decisions, had drifted away the way fog lifted slowly enough that you might believe it was the weather until you realized you could see your hand in front of your face again and he wasn't in it. First there had been late evenings, closing the store, then weekend fishing trips with clients, then a promotion in a city 2 hours away. The conversations had grown careful. The silences had grown longer. When he finally told Margaret he was moving out for a while to clear his head, she had stared at the framed photos on the mantel, Ethan at 5 in a paper crown, Matthew in a baseball cap, and thought, what terrible, ordinary words we use for disasters. Ethan had been 8. He had asked if it was his fault. She had lied with the same tenderness she used for bandaging scraped knees. Never, she had said. Not one bit. He had nodded, but his eyes had learned a new trick that winter, pretending not to look for something that wasn't there. It was astonishing, Margaret thought now, how quickly life reorganized itself around an absence. She picked up a second job at the clinic, learned to make dinner at 10 p.m., taught herself the mathematics of short money rent, heat groceries, a pair of shoes bought a size too big to last through growth. She discovered reservoirs of stamina where she had thought only fatigue lived. And Ethan, sweet and stubborn, discovered that anger hid in the same cupboard as grief, and that both of them smelled like his father's cologne when the cap had been left off. In the IQ, Ethan's chest rose and fell under the ventilator's patient guidance. Margaret watched the green peaks climb and descend and let the memories do the walking. They picked a path through birthday parties and parent-teacher conferences, and the night she had sat on the bathroom floor because the shower was running and she wanted the water to hide the sound of crying. They walked through the Saturday mornings when Ethan had played soccer until his legs looked like pipe cleaners, and the Tuesday afternoons when he had come home with the spelling test stamped with a red star and looked at her to make sure the star mattered to someone. It mattered. It mattered. It always had. She wondered if he knew. Adolescence arrived like a weather system that ignored forecasts. Ethan discovered height and volume at the same time. His voice, a thin reed in choir, thickened and cracked. His opinions hardened into angles. He practiced indifference like a new language and wore it everywhere, even when it pinched. The first time he rolled his eyes at her in front of other people, it startled her so much she laughed. The second time she snapped. By the fifth, it had carved a groove in their days. There had been good moments then too, and it hurt to handle them because they were edged with what came after. The late-night drives to the 24-hour diner for pancakes after Head bombed a chemistry exam and didn't want to talk about it at home. The way he had carried groceries without being asked. That winter she sprained her wrist. The afternoon, he came home with a stray kitten hidden beneath his jacket and tried to pretend the mewling noises were his phone. He had been all contradiction, a boy who could be thoughtless in a breath and then, as if remembering himself, turn kind. But the bad moments multiplied. Money was part of it. They could not afford the right shoes or the right trip, and shame ran hot in teenage veins. Margaret took on shifts no one else wanted, came home with feet that felt sore and eyes that wouldn't close. Exhaustion made her voice sharp when gentleness would have done a better job. Pride made his voice louder when silence was the braver choice. They built between them a wall composed entirely of moments they hadn't meant. She remembered the night of the homecoming dance. He was 17, tie crooked, hair pushed back with an earnestness that made him look suddenly 12 again. "Curfew is midnight," she had said, pinning the flower to his lapel with fingers that wouldn't stop trembling. He had opened his mouth to argue. She had heard herself say, "To fast. If you can't honor a simple rule, don't go." Had gone anyway. He had come back at 1:30, stinking of beer and breathless with the thrill of rule breaking. They'd fought in the hallway while the apartment slept, their voices ugly in the small hours, saying things neither had the right to say. Had slept on the couch that night, and in the morning neither of them had apologized because apologies require vulnerability and they were both hoarding armor. There were 100 scenes like that, a mosaic of almosts. The day she missed his final soccer game because a clinic patient had a seizure in the waiting room and the ambulance took longer than it should have. Shed arrived for the last 5 minutes, wild-eyed, just in time to see him get a yellow card for a slide tackle that looked like rage turned into motion. He hadn't looked for her in the stands. In the car afterward, he had stared out the window and said, "It's fine." She had wanted to say, "It's not." She had wanted to say, "I am doing my best and it is not enough." Instead, she had said, "You can't play like that. It's dangerous." He had laughed without humor. "Right," he had said. "Dangerous." If love was a ledger, theirs had lines scratched out and rewritten so many times the ink had bled through the page. College was supposed to soften things. He stayed in town, partly because they couldn't afford anything else, partly because he told his friends he didn't want to get trapped in a dorm with people who didn't know how to do laundry. He enrolled in general courses at the community college and acted like he was biding time until something deserving of him appeared. Margaret had heard the edge in that something deserving of me and wondered when she had stopped being part of the category. Still, there were the small, domestic mercies, the plates he washed without being asked when she worked a double and the sink filled up anyway, the times he carried her groceries and pretended not to notice how winded she was on the stairs the evening he found her nodding off in the chair with a bill in her lap and covered her with a blanket, clumsy as a kindness. And there were the landmines. He resented questions that sounded like surveillance. She resented answers that sounded like excuses. They danced around each other as if they were both keeping time to separate metronomes. On good days, their rhythms overlapped by accident and dinner jokes landed. On bad days, a fork scraped aloud and both of them flinched. Margaret's mind snagged on one memory, ordinary and sharp enough to cut. A Thursday in late spring. Rain had held the day hostage. The city wore a grey coat. She had come home early, a rare gift, and found Ethan at the table with textbooks splayed and a look on his face that did not match the hardness he preferred. He had been frowning at a statistics problem, chewing his pencil like it owed him money. She had stood in the doorway and watched him, an ache moving through her with the patience of glaciers. She had thought, he is so young still. She had thought, I have made him older than that. Need help, she had said finally. He had looked up, surprised into softness. You know stats. I know budgets, she had said. Close enough. She had sat beside him and they had added and divided and argued about parentheses and laughed when they realized they both had the same bad habit of skipping steps if they looked tedious. The rain had tapped the window with the quiet persistence of a friend, and for an hour the apartment had felt like a place people could be, not just a place they happened to sleep. When they were done, he had looked at her mouth as if he wanted to say something and wasn't sure it would land. Thanks, he had managed, teenage vocabulary doing its minimalist best. She had nodded, pretending the word didn't hit like a benediction. They had needed more of those hours. They had gotten too few. There was always a shift, always an exam, always the previous argument, sitting in the corner pretending to read a magazine. The worst of it, no, not the worst, but the one that stuck in the gears had been the night Head called her controlling. Had said it vaingloriously, like a verdict handed down by a judge in a courtroom had invented. She had stood by the sink with her hands wet and asked, who do you think held this house together when your father decided he preferred not to? He had thrown up his hands. Exactly, he had said. You think you're the only person who does anything. Maybe stop keeping score. The plate had slipped from her fingers and shattered. The cat had startled Ethan, had flinched, silence had fallen like ash. She remembered sweeping the shards into a dustpan and thinking, there is no way to win this argument that does not cost us something we cannot afford to lose. And yet here she was, keeping the only score that mattered, breaths in, breaths out. Machines did the arithmetic, she bore witness. She leaned forward and traced, without touching, the path of a stray lock of his hair against his forehead. I'm sorry, she whispered to the room, to the past, to the versions of them who had tried and failed and tried again. For all the times I loved you like a rule book. For all the times I loved you like an emergency. For all the times I didn't love you like air. She thought of her own mother, stern and practical, who had taught her to sew a straight seam and keep a budget tighter than a fist. Love had been there, too astonishing and immovable, but it had been offered in cans of soup stocked when she was sick and in boots lined with newspaper in winter. Her mother had not been one for speeches. She had believed that provision was the purest poetry. Margaret had inherited that belief without the talent to translate it for a boy who measured love in different units. She imagined, absurdly, the two of them at a counter Heaven had set up for reconciliation, tickets numbered, apologies exchanged in small bills, change given kindly. She imagined Ethan at 12, at 15, at 20, standing to one side with his arms crossed, accepting her offerings with a nod as if it embarrassed him to be seen needed. She imagined handing him, one by one, the words she had not known how to say when they were on time. I am scared. I am tired. I am proud of you when you can't hear me say it. I am learning how to love you in the way that reaches you, not the way that proves something about me. The dialysis machine murmured, and for a moment she despised its calm. Then she remembered this was the sound of help. Not sufficient, not permanent, but help. And somewhere beyond the glass, in a consult room with a marker board, there were conversations already taking shape that would demand from her decisions she could not yet imagine. If the kidneys did not wake, if the numbers did not improve, if the word transplant crossed the threshold from theory to plan, she felt inside herself a stillness that did not ask for permission. She had already answered the question the night before, blurting it to Dr. Carter like a reflex. It had not been a saintly impulse, She suspected it had been the practical culmination of everything that had made her hard and soft at the same time. Love that did math. Love that made a ledger balance with blood. Her phone vibrated in her bag. She fished it out with her free hand, thumbed the screen. A message from Claire, in bringing food. Tell me what you need. Another from her co-worker. I told Mrs. Halpert you won't be in. She's praying. Margaret typed back thank you and watched the words look small against the white. She put the phone away. She did not want the divide between inside and outside to widen. She wanted the room to hold all the necessary pieces of the day. Do you remember the tunnel under Maine? She asked Ethan softly. The way you talk to someone asleep when you are not sure if you're really trying to wake them or just keep yourself company. You were 6. You thought it was a dragon's throat. You refused to go unless I went first. Brave boy. Brave only when his mother was braver. His eyelids fluttered, or perhaps a draft moved. She took the movement as permission. You asked if the moon followed our car because it liked us. I told you yes. Maybe I lied, but it felt right. You asked me once if I missed being young. I said not when you were around. That was true. You made me feel like the point wasn't behind me. She swallowed and looked to the door as a nurse passed. The hum resumed its low pitch. I wasn't good at being both scaffolding and sky, she went on. I made the house stand, but I forgot sometimes to open a window. You wanted wind. I wanted walls. Maybe we both were right about something. She remembered another night, a power outage in January, the apartment lit with candles, the two of them wearing hats to bed and laughing at their breath fogging in the air like speech bubbles for ghosts. They had played cards by flashlight, and Ethan had cheated flagrantly because he couldn't stand to lose at anything, and she had let him win because sometimes the only strategy that mattered was kindness. He had fallen asleep on the couch with the hat slipping over one eye, and she had sat on the floor and watched the tiny flames wave and thought, we will be all right. We will be all right. It had been true that night because the measure of all right had been small. Warmth, laughter, boy breathing. Now the measure was smaller and larger at once. Breathing, again. Numbers that argued with one another on charts. Decisions that looked like cliffs and turned out to be bridges you built as you crossed them. Footsteps, Dr. Singh paused at the glass, peered in, and lifted a hand in greeting. Margaret nodded back. The doctor moved on. The corridor swallowed her white coat. Margaret placed her forehead on the back of Ethan's hand. I am not bargaining, she said into the cotton sheet. Though of course she was. I am remembering. And I am promising. If we get to the part where a choice is needed, I know mine. She straightened, wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand. But first, you and I are going to do the tiny brave things. You are going to keep breathing. I am going to keep sitting. We are both going to listen to the beeps and pretend they are a lullaby. A shadow shifted in the doorway. Josh, in a clean t-shirt now, hair tamed into something that looked almost deliberate. He hovered, contrite. Come, Margaret said, without turning the invitation into absolution. He stepped inside and stood at the foot of the bed, hands in his pockets like a penitent. I brought, he held up a lumpy paper bag. Claire said you might need snacks. She's scary in a comforting way. She is, Margaret said, a smile threatening and then escaping. Thank you. He cleared his throat, eyes on Ethan. I was thinking this morning about that time we took him to the lake and he tried to skip a rock and it went straight up instead of out. Margaret snorted despite herself. He refused to admit that defied physics. He said it meant he had secret powers, Josh said, grinning weakly. We made fun of him for a month. Cruel, she said. Appropriate. They let the tiny, ridiculous memory sit between them like a warm roll passed at a table. The room felt less like a cage when laughter visited, even briefly. After a while, Josh said, softer, he loves you, you know. Even when hates him. I know, Margaret said. Even when in me. Josh nodded, relief loosening his shoulders just enough to look like hope. When he left, she leaned back in the chair and closed her eyes. Memory had done its work. It had hurt her and helped her, as it always did. It had reminded her of the boy she had raised and the woman she had become. Neither of them saints, both of them stubborn, both of them made by the same weather. It had clarified the future's outline without pretending to color it in. She opened her eyes. The monitor painted another green mountain. The dialysis machine hummed, patient as tide. She took Ethan's hand again, as if she had ever let it go, and gave him the only truth that had not shifted under any of this. "We are not finished," she said. If he heard, he did not show it. But the room seemed to hear and agree. The beep settled, the ventilator sighed. The afternoon slid toward evening with the confidence of something that had decided to continue. Margaret sat with her memories and let them be what they were. Not shackles, not wings, but stones in a pocket that kept her from being blown away. She would need them for the days ahead. She would need them when the words long-term and options and risk started to assemble themselves into sentences with her name tucked inside. She would need them to keep her hand steady when she signed consent forms and to keep her voice gentle when Ethan woke and realized the width of the road he was on. For now, breath, pulse, promise. For now, the steady company of what had been, the fragile architecture of what might be. For now, a mother in a bad chair and a boy in a good bed and a machine that sounded like patience. The past finished its slow tide and left behind, as tides do, small shining things along the shore. A plastic soldier missing an arm, a smooth stone with a stripe of quartz, a bottle cap from a long discontinued soda. Margaret gathered them, the little keepsakes of their history, and arranged them on the windowsill of her mind. They were not enough to build a future, but they were proof that one had existed. It was a start. Outside, evening blued the hospital glass. Inside, the room kept breathing. Margaret pressed a kiss to Ethan's knuckles, sat back, and waited for whatever the next hour would ask.